Right, for this tutorial, it will be a car interior, so let's get started. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to do straight from scratch, so you can see my whole workflow. It's just currently just sketching out some perspective lines, getting an idea as to where I want my angle of view. As I've done quite a few sketches which are in this book, I've got a rough idea as to what I want to achieve. So I already know roughly what I wanted to draw. Normally my initial sketches, once trying to find a form and a design, are usually quite loose compared to this, but the more I know what I want to achieve, the tighter I get generally. So what I've got there so far is the back of the seat and top of the headrest, and then just currently sketching in the actual base of the seat. Suddenly it looks a bit more clearer now. So that's the top of the headrest just there. This tutorial is going to be quite long because I'm going to do everything from scratch right the way through to a finished rendering. And along the way I will explain tools and methods. As you can see on the left, there's a layers bar. The initial perspective lines I did as a guide are on the background layer, and then layer 1 is the one I'm currently working on. And if you press spacebar, that toggle wheel comes up. And by pressing spacebar, you can rotate, pan, and zoom, which gives you the feeling of like being on a piece of paper on your desk and you being able to turn your page. I recommend turning your pages up whenever possible, so you can get to a natural, comfortable position to draw a nice, clean line. As you can see here, I'm trying to keep the lines as one solid stroke. You don't want to have a drawing made up of lots of hashed little lines. Do this via drawing with your shoulder and your elbow. So you want to keep your wrist fixed, and you want to have your wrist hovering above the actual tablet or the page, and you want to move your arm to draw nice, consistent, smooth lines. If you plant your wrist, you can only draw an arc to the radius of your wrist. Okay, so I've got 2 headrests in there and just putting the back into the interior. This isn't a full car, it's just an interior of a 2-seater supercar. Just working on some detail where it goes into the actual parcel shell for the car. With this I wanted something that's quite organic, and I wanted the seats to mould into the actual skeleton of the actual car, the actual chassis, the frame. So here you can see that the seats kind of wrap down past the sill into something underneath, where ideally you'd have your transmission. Okay, what I'm just putting in now is the roofline. I've just taken it off. Okay, so that's the intended roofline. Gives you an idea of the cabin then when you're drawing, and this is a previous interior I've done, and you get an idea from that as to how the seats are cocooned in the dash. And I use this as a reference because although this is a slightly different proposal, I want to have the same sort of theme going through them. So I've got a centre console that lowers into the dash, which is quite high where your elbow would be. And then this currently putting in the binnacle on the top of the steering wheel. And now trying to work out where the centre console goes into the dash and what the actual trim to the surfaces is going to be. Again, I wasn't happy with what I just did, so I'm blocking in the actual perspective line for the actual dashboard, so I understand where the actual steering wheel is going to be, where the seats are in relation to that. And what I've done, I've lowered the opacity on that layer. By doing everything on a different layer, you can then make things as construction lines almost to then use as an overlay or an underlay. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm blocking in because I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, so I'm blocking this in. I'm doing it on a lower layer. Then I can use that as reference. And these are previous sketches and renderings I've done for the same sort of project. It's the same car, but I'm just exploring different themes and different designs for the interior cockpit. So as I'm rendering this, I'm still designing this, I'm still trying to find something that looks good in various different forms. Again, looking back at the reference, where am I going with this? Now, for the purpose of this tutorial, I think it's good to show you the actual process to get into a rendering. I could, if it was just solely a rendering tutorial, I could have just done the sketch, had the sketch ready and waiting, and then done the rendering and showed you how to shade and render. But for this, I wanted to show you my process and the way I go about designing. And typically this day and age, I do everything 100% digital now. A lot of people still use pen and paper and sketch, and then scan their sketches in and then render the sketches. But I work digitally now as part of my day job as well as my personal work. So again, just keep checking with the referencing and seeing if I'm happy with certain choices and lines. Here you can see I'm playing around with the air vent on the top of the dash. What shape do I leave? And like that shape, I'll probably change that later on. And for the purpose of this vehicle, I like it's quite layered. So at the minute that the dash kind of layers over the top of the centre console, which is what I'm drawing in now. And then that goes into another air vent. So now I'm blocking in the steering wheel. This is quite conceptual, and as opposed to a round steering wheel, it's more like a handlebar sort of design. Try to think of your composition as well, and your proportions and your form when you're doing your sketches. because you can have the same design drawn by two different people, and the same design will look good or bad. It's learning the knack of the angle of view, the perspective of how to pull off a design. It's something I stress you must learn, and it takes a long time. I've been drawing and designing since I was about 11 years old, which is roughly about 15 years now. Right, what I'm doing now, I've created a new layer, and I'm going to start blocking in some shade now and put some shadows in. And this is quickly, as you can see, I'll get a marker the area that I want to be blacked out or shaded or tone, and then I'll get an eraser, and then I'll erase as close to the sketch as I can, but still being quite rough with it at the minute, because this is just the foundation for everything that's got to go on top, so I won't get too concerned about everything. But it just gives you, it suddenly gives the sketch a bit of life and a bit of depth. And it's again the same process. What I do now, I create a new layer and work on a new layer so that it doesn't affect what I've done previously, so I can erase this area that I'm doing now and it hasn't affected the ones I've just done beneath. So this is my method. I block in with colour, or I'll do a lot of stuff in grey first and add colour last, because it's easy to render in grey. So as you can see, what I'll do, once I'm happy with what I've done, I'll then merge that layer down onto the lower layer, so it all becomes on one layer. So there's it merged. Now I've created a new layer again. So what I do in this layer will only be affected by the tools I use on this layer, so rubbing it out doesn't affect the stuff I've just done on the previous layer. And what I'm doing here is just blocking in the shadow underneath the actual dashboard. So now I'm getting a sense of the top of the dash is light, the underside of the dash is dark where the footwell is. And I'm just going to build that up gradually via the marker and the eraser. Again, don't worry about too much about being too precise at this stage. I mean, the more precise you are, the better. But at this stage, it's not the end of the world. Now you can see how I've built that up out of 3 layers, and now it's on 1 layer. And now I've created another layer on top. Same process, I repeat the same process constantly. If I weren't to merge my layers down, I'd end up with roughly about 100 to 200 layers, depending on how complex the rendering is. So I always merge the same colours down, so if I'm doing blacks like I am here, and then I'm using the opacity to make it go grey, so I'm using a black marker, and the opacity is about 50%. So it turns out grey, and you can see through your layer, so you can see the sketch underneath it. And I use this to form the basis of my renderings. And by merging the layers down, once I'm happy with them, I'll have all the shadows on 1 layer, and it also keeps your layer count down, because the more layers you've got, it will slow your computer down because you've just got too much to process, basically, depending on how good your graphics cards are. That was the V key. If you press V, you can move that layer, you can rotate it, and that wheel pops up, which is also the cross arrows on the toolbar above. Okay, so I've got the shadows are all on 1 layer, sketches on another layer, and then I've got a background, which is the perspective line at the beginning. Again, same process. Create a new layer, do your shading on that layer, and then once you're happy with it, flatten it down, unless you're using a different colour. Also, on your layers, you'll see on the right hand side of the layer there's like a little wheel. And if you hold on those, it gives you options similar to things like Photoshop, where you can multiply, screen, add, and normal. The multiply will make anything that's white transparent. Screen will make anything that's white really bright and vibrant. And similar with the add. So you can, if you have a light colour over top of a sketch and you click multiply, suddenly the sketch will appear through. And these are quite useful for renderings and sketches. So make good use of those tools. So what I'm doing now, I'm just adding some gradient and some tone to the actual dashboard itself, because it's going to be some kind of plastic of some form. Could even be a textured material, but you've got to have a basis for it. It's got to have a base, it's got to have a foundation to the colour. Like I say, I tend to do everything grey, and once I'm happy with the tones and the shadows, I'll then apply colour later on. So what I've done there, I've zoomed in and I've made the brush really low, a really small diameter, so I can get in there and get it nice and tight and nice and clean. So what I'm doing now is, between the dash and the seat, I've got the centre console, so what I'm doing is putting some tone and grade in onto centre console to now you might find you'll have your own ways and methods of doing things, and by all means I encourage you to find a style that you like and a way of working, and go with it and really develop your own style, because one of the most important things to make you stand out in the industry when you're trying to get a design position, or you're trying even to get into university, you need to be better than everybody else. And by having your own style of renderings and paintings and drawings, and it comes across and it shows. So the more individual your style can be, the better it is for your future chances of a career in the design industry. Me in particular, I went to Coventry University in the UK, and I studied automotive design, hence why most of my portfolio is full of automotive stuff. That was where my passion was. I went to university at 19. I started drawing cars when I was 11. So before I'd even got to university, I'd been drawing cars for a good 8-9 years. And the amount that you will develop is all dependent on time. So the more you put in, the more you will develop, the more you'll improve. And as long as you work on the basics and you work on what's called line work, so nice smooth lines, nice clean strokes, keeping everything nice and tidy, and you work on that, and then once you've worked to that where you're comfortable with doing long strokes with the brush, like you can see how quick, this is real time, so you can see how quick my mouse is moving, which is my tablet. I'm using a Wacom, so you get an idea as to how rapid I sketch. Now, the quicker you can get, the better, and it will also give you better line work. And once you've got your line work to a high quality, you can then work on the time and how quick you can do these, because time is everything. But when you're learning, you've got it's a long process, and you've got to take it slow at first and get the quality right. Once you've got your quality, you can then work on your speed. And I'm still learning things now in my day job. And you'll always be learning, you'll never stop learning. So as software develops and new software comes out, you'll find new tools and you do new things. I've always liked the way of sketching on a piece of paper. Tools like Photoshop, you have to path a lot, and it's tedious and it's monotonous, penning out little lines to mask off areas to draw inside of. Whereas with this program, Sketchbook Pro, Corel Painter is quite similar as well. It feels more natural to me, which is why it's my tool of choice. I use this program at work and at home. I mean, you'll find your own programs that you're comfortable with. So just tidying up the edges now with a really tight, sharp eraser. You've got a soft eraser on the left there, and you've got a harsh square eraser. This is a harsh eraser, but you can play around with your settings and the brush settings on the right hand side of my screen. So you can soften it or you can make it harder. And you can do the same thing with your pens and your markers and your brushes. So I'm using a soft eraser now to give it a nice soft gradient. So if you take note of my brush properties when I've got a certain tool open, you'll notice the settings that I'm using. I tend to use the same settings all the time because I've got a certain method to doing things. But you'll develop what you like in your own styles, which is where these tool settings come into it. So using a soft eraser, so the amount of erase is 32% and quite a large size. And then that allows me to get a nice soft radius. Now this is quite small, but a main erase is 100%. And what I'm doing here is I've gone back to my sketch layer, the base layer, my underlay, and I'm tidying that up now, and I'm removing the things I don't want to be in the final render. So I'm tidying that line up with the intentions of it not seeing it now. And again, I'm playing with the opacity of the layer now to see through the layer. So I've got a marker now. Marker's got a slant on it and it's quite large. Again, quite harsh eraser, gives me a harsh, crisp, clean line. It gives you the sense of there's a surface above that area creating the shadow. There's a lip, and as easy as that, it's a bit of grey, bit of tone, bit of shadow. So surfaces facing up I've got quite light, surfaces facing down are quite dark. So negative spaces and stuff like that are quite dark, especially like under here to go wraps underneath the car. So that's going to be quite a dark area. Again, notice the hand movement, notice how quick I'm trying to draw that line. I find the quicker I draw the line, the more accurate the line is. You won't get it right all the time. I still don't get it right all the time, but just Command Z or Control Z just to undo the action, and just keep doing it until you get the right line. Again, just using the new layer, keeping all the layers separate until you're happy with them, and just building up the shadows now, just building up all the tone. Now just going in here and removing this now, so now you can see it's getting quite tight in there now. I have no other choice, I have to zoom in quite far, make the eraser as small as I can, and nice quick line, make it nice and straight. Follow the arc as close as possible. Yeah, and that's as small as my eraser can go now. So here we're getting into pixels now. This is where the higher your resolution, the better. When you're setting up your programs or your Photoshop page or whatever you use, make sure you've got a high resolution. So when you do like a new image, you want to get like 300 dpi minimum, really, which stands for pixels per square inch. Because that way you can get in really close and you can get nice crisp corners with a higher resolution. So as you can see, I'm just moving the page around, rotating it to make itself comfortable for myself. And what I'm doing here, I'm just adding some tone to the negative side of the seat. So the seat kind of goes in on itself, creating like a hole in the actual base, which becomes more clear as the rendering goes on. Typically I spend anywhere between 2 and 4 to 5 hours on a rendering, depending on how complex it is. If it's something like a car interior, you're normally looking between 2 to 4 hours. An exterior on the car rendering or a product you could do quite quickly. An exterior, a car exterior, I could probably churn one out in about 2.5 hours. Products, things that are quite small and simple, like bottles or kettles, generally quite quick. You can do them within an hour. So again, with this, as you're going through your careers or your education, you want to concentrate on your quality of your work, nice clean work, and the precision of your line work. And as a person, you'll come through in your own work. So what I'm doing now, to get reflective surface, I create a nice harsh edge, and then from that harsh edge, I then use a soft eraser, and it gives you a gradient from a harsh line. So that bottom line of that shadow it's been erased slightly, but you can still see the line, so then you end up getting this almost highlight almost on reflection. Here I'm just adding shadow to the back of the headrest, which comes from the partial shelf above the head and then down the back of the head, which gives this nice shaded negative area. So again, because the light's coming from the top, the underside of the headrest is going to be in shadow. Here I've turned the opacity of the sketch layer down, and now you can see the shading itself is telling a lot of the actual design now. So now, as I progress with this now, I'm going to get further to the point where I don't need the sketch now. The whole idea now, from here onwards, is to remove the need for the sketch underneath. And then in the final rendering, we'll actually just turn the actual sketch layer off. So you won't see any of the line work. And it'll be all based on the actual rendering on the rendered surfaces as well. Now what I'm doing here, there's a design surface that's a different material in between the actual headrest and the seat. So what I'm doing now is I'm greying out the area in the middle, which is separate to the actual body of the seat. So once I've got a nice clean line for the internal shape, nice big eraser, and just erase the rest with quite a large eraser, because there's no need to worry about being quite so close to the line. And just zooming in on the details and getting that corner nice and clean, nice and tidy. There we go. Now what I'm doing now, just deciding where to go next. I'm just going to start to build some tone up on this area I've just coloured in. Now I want the top surface to be quite highlighted, so it's in the same sort of surface plane as the actual bodywork to the headrest. And I want it to dip in between the two seats and then back up to the headrest on the opposite side. So there's going to be a negative, there's going to be a lower surface in here. And I'm going to do that by adding tone as it rolls down into the actual surface, which will become more apparent in the next few seconds. Again, cleaning up that corner. So now that implies that there's a difference in height in the surface as it goes over the headrest and into the parcel shelf. And a nice soft eraser, quite a low amount erased, and just building up some tone as it goes to the other side of the vehicle. And then I'm going to use a soft eraser right on this edge to give the idea of it gradient wrapping around the actual rounded surface. So that's quite a soft surface, it's not a harsh surface, so I don't want it to be a harsh line. And then again, I'm just going to build it all up now. And just building up where the seam is now, where the two components meet, with contrast. And there you get an idea of there's some surface change going on in there. Being able to understand what you're trying to show and what you actually draw is quite important. Some people understand what they want to convey, but they draw something completely different. So you've got to have a good foundation in fine art and shading and tone and colour, so you understand what a surface does to achieve a certain colour. Observing cars or products and how the light reacts with the actual colour of the product and how the shadows interact with the product is something you should learn and understand and observe as you're developing and as you're studying. So you've got a good understanding of how light interacts with something you're rendering. I use a soft eraser now just to soften the edges so it looks like it's a soft radius. But at the same time there's a definite surface change. There's an upwards surface and there's a horizontal surface. The vertical surface is horizontal and there's a radius in between the two. So the edge of the colour is going to be soft, but there still needs to be a definite surface change, which is what I achieved there by just having a harsh colour but softening the edges of that colour. Okay, what I'm doing, I'm getting happier now with the surface change. You can see there's a definite split between the two surfaces and a surface in between that blends, and just trying to emphasise that a bit more. And you can see getting the contrast between the two surfaces now. Nice dark tonal, plastic coloured probably, against the harsh, probably even metal work. I'm just going to add some soft gradient to it by erasing with a soft eraser. If you look at any material, although it's the same material, it never appears flat because of light and the way that light hits it. Right, what I'm doing here is just adding some white airbrushed and then erasing just to give a nice highlight to the top of the surfaces. Okay, what we've got there is by erasing it slightly short of the line, it gives like a white highlight to the edge. It implies there's an edge to the surface. And then also giving thickness to the headrest as well. Okay, here I'm trying to convey the surface change from the top of the headrest as it goes into the actual shoulders of the seat now, and how that affects its light and its shadow. So it gives a defined thickness to the actual headrest itself, so it doesn't appear weak or flimsy. It looks quite chunky and quite muscular. And I want to, by using the shadow on the vertical surfaces again, what I'll do, I'll soften the edges of those so it gives like a radius sort of gradient to it, but it clearly shows there's a change in the surface. Again, just playing with the opacity on it to make it whether I want more contrast or less. The more contrast, the harsher the change in surface. So for example, it's quite a round, soft, flat surface, and then all of a sudden it goes vertical and then horizontal again. Here I've ended up deciding on quite a harsh crease in the surface, hence that harsh black line there. Now what I'll do, by shading quite softly the lead up to that harsh line, it gives you an idea of a soft surface going into a harsh crease. Now here I'm just emphasising the shadow and the change there as it blends from the shoulder into the headrest. And by having that harsh edge but then slightly softened, gives an idea of a metallic sort of reflective surface. The more I do this, the more it makes sense. And what I'm doing is trying to get a nice edge, and this is the surface on top now, giving me that white edge there, the end of the surface. Look at the thickness to the metal or plastic, or whatever it may be. Now you can see how I've erased that area, but you can still see a white highlight. It gives the impression there's thickness to that surface, and there's like a part line or a shut line. Here I'm emphasising the underside now. So I've got a definite dark underside, a gradient top, and a harsh white for a bit of contrast. This shows how the surface is going from underneath to the side and then to the top. You've got three definite sides to the car. Again, this is something you can experiment with. This is just keep going until you're happy with it. If you're not happy with it, delete, undo, change it, do something differently. Now here I'm just going to emphasise the shadows on the far right headrest. you're doing now is just drawing a partition between the two surfaces by just a really thin black line. It gives the impression that the surfaces have been split. As you can see, I've done that in 2 lines, and then I erase the blend between them. Again, you can see I'm trying to do this in 1 line, and just keep doing it until you get it right. Don't settle for the first line. You'll understand when you're using a Wacom, it feels quite strange to do it digitally. Eventually I will get it right. Or I believe I'd change my method. There we go. And again, just erase that. Okay, that gives you the impression now that there's a different material that's been dropped in there, almost like an inlay. Just soft erasing the edges off that now, so you get the impression, but just a slight impression. Just rotating the page now to make it comfortable to draw the next line. Again, I encourage people to use their shoulders and their arms and not their wrists. Don't plant your wrists when you're drawing these lines. If you plant your wrists, you then end up with terrible looking lines, to be frank. And you want them nice and clean, nice and crisp. Don't be afraid to turn your page as well. Now here I'm just applying some really dark, heavy shadow. This implies there's a negative, and it's quite dark in that area. It goes in quite far. Again, I want to emphasise the contrast between the dashboard and the footwell, so make it really dark in there now. Now, I want to really emphasise the top of the seat and the dashboard, as they're the higher surfaces in the vehicle. So by making all the shadow on the floor and the footwell quite dark and quite intense, emphasises the seats and the dashboard. Just by having a higher rate of contrast, just makes the dashboard pop off the page more. Again, now just working some shade now into the base of the seat, and really giving off the impression that the side of the backrest wraps underneath the belly of the car into the rear axles. And by doing that, I'm leaving that quite harsh white and making the surrounding bodywork quite grey and gradient and soft with dark areas, really emphasising that white area. It gives it a kind of layered effect as well. Again here, just trying to get a nice clean line, tidy it up. So I'm just finding something that I'm happy with. And that just gives you the impression that the rear of the car flows into the sill of the door and then into the actual dashboard. So it's the same surface wrapping underneath the seat and flowing into the sill of the door. Gives it a lot of sculpture and three-dimensionality as well. Now, by having these gradients as well, it gives the impression that the surface is changing. It's like twisting and rotating. So it's going from being face down to being face up as it goes into the sill. Again, they're emphasising the negative space where it goes into the seat. So the black area in the shadow really emphasises there's no light getting into there, and it's tucked away into the side of the seat. If you're looking into industrial design, I mean, I always found inspiration in sculptors like of Henry Moore and Bob Hepworth. The way that they get a surface to transition and go from soft to a harsh line. By studying those, you get an idea and understanding as to how the surface is changing and what makes you think the surface is changing. So in terms of rendering and shading that surface, and then understanding what it actually is doing in 3D, it only aids and makes you better at translating your designs into a 3D. Because not only have you got to be able to draw this, you've got to be able to translate it into a 3D model, whether it be clay or whether it be foam or whether it be digital. You've got to understand what you're trying to achieve by your drawings and your sketches. That's where a foundation of fine art at A level or college really helps your understanding of tone, shade and light and form. Now here what I'm doing, where that surface wraps over the top of the centre console, I'm emphasising the difference between the surface by adding shadow and shade. So you can see it's raised above that actual surface. and thereby being raised, it's casting a shadow onto the surface below it. Here I'm just really working on the contrast between what might be the area in which I have a handbrake, a gear stick, or even a digital readout area. The definite surface change and the material change, and emphasising that between how it blends into the dashboard from that actual centre console. Just by adding nice dark against a nice light. Later on we'll look at start adding colour to the actual rendering. Now here I'm looking at adding some shadow cast by the seat. So as the light can't get down underneath the seat, it casts a shadow on the floor. This also helps the seat, the base of the seat, stand out as well. What I'm doing here now is adding a nice soft gradient to the actual dashboard. So as you can see from the cross section on the side now where the mouse is, that is the curvature of the actual dashboard I'm trying to convey. So on that rounded edge there's going to be a gradient where the light is softly rolling around the surface. So where the dashboard will meet the windscreen, I've kept that quite white and quite light. I'm just going to add shadow now to the underside as it goes past being a positive to a negative. In this case, positive being a surface facing upwards and negative facing downwards. And by using a soft erase here, I'm just showing how from the binnacle above the speed dials and the rever, here's a nice soft blend from that top surface blending back into the dashboard. Here I'm just using the dark to show the surface transitions and how the surface is changing shape. It won't necessarily be under darkness and in shade, but I'm using that to show the transition from the flat surface into the top of the binnacle above the actual speedometer. Now here, well, I've just blacked that in. What I'm doing now is I'm creating a highlight on the actual side of the metal work. Now notice how we've got nice, crisp, sharp lines. And then I'm going to use a soft eraser, erasing and it gives you the impression that it's a metallic surface. Now here I'm using the V key and just scaling it or moving it and tweaking it just so it sits right on the actual metal. Now again, done it quite soft with an airbrush now, so it's gradient from the start, then created a sharp line in that. I've gained this method from just observing how light reacts on a metal surface, from just looking at cars in the car park, for example, and just really studying them. And gives the impression that it's reflecting on a horizon. Here I just feel still that there's not enough contrast between the seat and the centre console, so just adding a bit more shade in there. Again, just playing with the contrast and giving some kind of tone and shape and three-dimensionality to the seat base. And here, just coming back to air vents on the actual dashboard now, just going to start working into some details. Again, just trying to tidy up what I've just done now. Once I'm happy with the shape and line. Now, for the first time, I've just changed colour. Now I'm going to start using a lighter grey. So that's an hour and 14 minutes into the rendering, and that's the first time I've changed the colour. That gives you an idea of my process. Now what I've done there, I've just moved the layer underneath the black layer. And then I just merged the black layer onto the grey layer and then back onto the main layer. My new layer says layer 79, although I've only got 4 layers, so it gives you an idea of how many layers I've used to create this. Using the same process as drawing the layer, merge it down, drawing the layer, merge it down. Here I'm just adding some kind of vent detail into the actual vents. Just gives the impression there's a mechanism in there to alter the angle of the air vent. And here just using a really harsh white just to give that nice metallic trimmed edge. Just a nice highlight on there, little reflections. And here I'm just working into the design of the binnacle, where the dials and the speedos and that are. Using a light grey, an off-white almost. I'm just going to block in the actual base shape, and I'll start playing around with the actual design of the lamps. Now I'm going to use it quite a lot darker now, just to show the depth and the surfaces within the speedos. And instantly just making that a 3-dimensional shape. So now I've put that on multiply, and now you can see that the sketch appears underneath